Hi, welcome to Jigsaw. I'm Peter Block.
I'm Oren Koulis.
And I'm Mark Berg.
And if you're listening to this for the first time, go back and watch all the other movies and listen to the commentary because we're on all of them.
And it's pretty cool right off the start. We have Charlie Clouser kind of revamping his famous Hello Zepp theme, and we let Charlie have a lot of freedom on this one. And also, Charlie had time.
And the new Twisted Pictures logo.
And Mark and Oren bring up a good point. You know, one of the interesting things for this Jigsaw movie, because there had been a delay for a number of years, was, how much do we go back to the old and how much do we try something new? And we tried to incorporate a lot of both. So we have Charlie doing the theme, but doing it differently.
And just so you could see, like, we are outside in this movie. One of our goals was to make it a Saw movie and not a Saw movie at the same time.
And that came even down to bringing in the Spierig brothers, who hadn't been involved in the franchise. We have a lot of the crew and the producers and people who had been involved, but we went to some new voices with the writers and also with the directors to kind of bring just a new energy and also something new to talk about. We know that for a lot of you, you've been there through every one of the movies, and for some of the others, you might have said, hey, it's been 5 years, why should I get back off the couch and go out? So we wanted to come up with reasons.
And this is a different Saw opening right here. Exterior, car crash, chase, nothing like this we've done before.
And the funny thing about the fellow who plays Edgar, who ends up on the roof, is he got the job. He was in Vancouver, and what he didn't say is he had no way of getting to Toronto and didn't bother telling anyone. So he and his wife jumped in their car and decided, they had just been married about 2 weeks, decided to drive all the way to Toronto, and they lost 2 cars on the way, didn't they, Mark?
Yeah, they
didn't know that.
They bought a car for $500 that died somewhere around Calgary. Had to buy a second car, and that also didn't make it all the way through.
Well, that goes to show you, please don't ever buy a car for $500.
And he did a great job.
By the way, notice the clock. So Mark and I were doing some press in New York for New York Comic Con last week. And outside of our hotel was the most amazing clock you've ever seen. The amount of clocks that Pete and Mark and I and editors, everybody looked at was amazing. And the best clock was literally outside of our hotel we just saw in New York.
That clock doesn't exist where we shot the movie in Toronto. But we wanted to put a time frame on it and needed a clock tower.
So, Callum Rennie is one of the great Canadian actors. We were really lucky to get him. And, with everybody in this movie, all the actors at each level, they really elevated their characters. Sometimes you can watch a movie and you're like, they just do what's on the page. But for each one of these guys, they really said, we're going to bring personality. What's interesting about this sequence is when we originally were imagining it, it was a very long sequence that ended here. But as we were trying to work with our budget and our schedule, it got truncated down to this. And I think the Spierig brothers really brought it home with an exciting opening that kind of gets us into, lets people know it's a different kind of movie, but you don't have to wait 15 minutes to start seeing the Saw parts that you came for as we start to get into the head trap.
Which one of you assholes shot him in the chest?
Okay. It's started.
Mark, you remember shooting this that day on the roof. That warehouse that we were shooting in had been an old soap factory. So when we scouted it, it was still full of all the muck and grime and smells that were so awful from rendering and things. We finally got it cleaned, but you still always worried about where you were stepping, remember?
Always.
Was it, they called it the Palmolive plant, or I think it was Palmolive. And they actually had old displays in the corner of like old boxes of like whatever Palmolive products there were.
There was stuff in there you didn't want to know what it was, and you're talking to guys who've seen just about everything in a Saw movie.
We shot Saw 1 in a dirt floor, so.
Now we cut to interior on our stage for the first Saw-type trap.
And so the Spierig brothers really said, we want to kind of be in a Saw universe, but at the same time, we want to kind of make people feel like it's different. So this was their spaceship set, and that's what we were going for here. You still get the sensibility of a Saw movie, but it doesn't look like the same grimy warehouses and basements that you'd been in. We also realized early on that the idea of shooting everybody in buckets was really cool conceptually, but we didn't realize how much we were going to have to focus on lighting the eyes to kind of differentiate who everybody was and give them the personality when you couldn't see their faces. It was one of the challenges, but at the same time, it really let the performers, shine through.
Why you're here. You deny culpability, no doubt, for the circumstances.
The other thing about this scene, which was interesting, is when we originally set it up, some of the blades are actual props, and some of the blades are visual effects that we put in. And what we realized early on was we hadn't figured out the diameters of the blades right so that they would hit the buckets. So we actually had to go back and redo inserts with bigger blades, because otherwise they would have hit the people before they ever would have gotten to the bucket. And as you'll see later on, and you probably already know this, it needs to decapitate somebody, but we didn't have a blade big enough, so we had to go create that and go back into this room later.
Escape from this room with your lives. If you can release yourself from your demons, you can begin to shed the chains that those demons bring with them. Make the simple blood sacrifice that I've requested.
The other thing is, when we start out with these movies, we're always aware that we want to kind of premiere at Comic-Con and have a good trailer and something to leak early. So getting the first trap right is really important, because it's usually the only thing that we will ever show. And we know that it has to kind of be endemic to a Saw movie. So blades, very important, screaming, blood, and this pod was created for the purpose of being the teaser and the trailer early on.
So the great thing is now you'll hear some information, since the movie will have been out and you're watching this DVD or watching it online. But there's been so much speculation in Reddit and all of the different chat rooms about who's actually in this room and who's in this bucket, and it's pretty interesting stuff.
And of course, some of our actors are really terrific. Laura Vandervoort, who is the girl standing right there, had come off of Smallville. Brittany Allen had done a short film which just recently played LAFF called Stains the Sand Red. But the real coup here was Paul, who plays Ryan, brought a level of comedy that we had never really had before in a Saw movie, and I think it's really refreshing, and I think a lot of people are responding to it as well. Also for Laura, it was the first time she'd been a brunette in quite a while, and it gave her just a completely different look. Laura was a blonde when we hired her, and we turned her brunette. Brittany was a brunette, and we turned her blonde. And then Hannah, who plays Eleanor, was somewhat of a strawberry blonde, and then we turned her into some crazy Rorschach test of Jackson Pollock, and before we started shooting, and then we got her back to a redhead.
So basically we did Mark, Oren, and Peter's version of Charlie's Angels. We had a blonde who wasn't a blonde, a brunette who wasn't a brunette, and a redhead who wasn't a redhead, but Charlie's Angels.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about these sets is they are really connected in real life. Usually you'd build one set, you'd build another, but this buzzsaw room actually connected into the farmhouse room. So we were able to kind of do these long shots, which we wouldn't otherwise have been able to do in any other setting, because it wasn't a very high set. We usually had very high sets to work with, but it was a very long set. So the stage we worked on allowed us to kind of be in all the different rooms and give different perspective. In the past Saw movies, you usually see people in one room, and then you see them going out a door and then entering another one, and it's usually the same space, and we're just kind of repurposing it.
The game's real.
Don't know.
Why do you think he asked for you?
We're good friends. Put him away twice.
Clay Bennett.
Munson is a sociopath.
Introducing Clay Bennett.
In and out of prison for assault and battery.
Very, very good actor. A guy that became quickly one of our favorites.
Doc, we need him away.
Not quite as stoic in real life as he plays.
Although he had the same fashion sense as his character.
Yes,
he might
he
be
does.
the first guy who actually wanted to take his wardrobe home.
In a Saw movie, that's for sure.
Exactly.
I mean, if you're Richard Gere being dressed by Armani in American Gigolo, you'd absolutely want that outfit, those amazing suits. But most people in Saw movies don't take the clothes.
This is not going to end well. Hungry?
And this is where Keith Rennie really brought his own perspective, the whole hungry part and things like that. He tried to branch it out, and it really kind of lends itself. He's just that cynical guy. And Brittany screams better than anyone.
I wouldn't say better than anyone, but she's up there in a Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Now, Mandela Van Peebles, he was a great find for us. I think we cast him not knowing his lineage, but his dad is Mario Van Peebles and his dad Melvin.
His grandfather's Melvin.
Yeah, his grandfather Melvin, and who I met many years ago when I showed his film at college. So that was a great circle to bring to closure.
I think all Mandela asked is that he not be the first person killed. He's like, I don't want to be it's always the black actor that get killed first. So we changed that.
Carly. Don't touch me.
Some bastard, sick idea of a joke.
He said it was a game. Well, then I hope for all of our sakes that it is a game.
Oh, yeah, why is that, sweet?
Now, the interesting thing for every Saw movie that we do is, there's always an A story and the B story. There's the people in the trap and there's the people out of the trap. And coming up with a balance is always the key. Obviously, in the first movie, you're always really focused on, what are those guys? What's Carrie and Lee? How are they going to get out of it? And everybody else is kind of tangential. But, as we move forward in the series, while the traps have gotten more elaborate and while the audiences have always said, we want to see more blood, more guts, it really makes it hard to make that sustainable, so you have to develop the outside.
Pete, remember when we shot this? You were the one that said we got to zoom in closer on the dead guy. And the interesting fact right here, our producer, Oren Koulis, this is his daughter, who has a hell of a right arm.
It was an interesting thing. The Spirig said, well, can she throw? I said, sure, she could throw. And I actually sent him about a minute tape of her gunning it.
I think she throws better than our actor, Matt Passmore.
Well, what they didn't realize is the lead. Well, they actually should have because they're all Aussies, but an American girl can throw better than an Aussie guy. Sorry about that.
Jumping back to the bridge sequence, the funny part about it is we left the body hanging in the overpass after we moved the whole crew because it was really hard to take down the rigging, and we knew we'd do it later. And there is a train, an elevated train that goes by that place, and people reported it to the police, and the police all showed up to deal with the suicide, which of course was us, and we made the papers there. Unintended, but great publicity.
Yeah, the police were less than thrilled. In introducing Hannah Anderson.
Yeah, the funny part is when we cast her, we said, she's very meek and mild. Is she going to really be able to pull off this role? And as soon as she got the role and stepped into character, it was like, watch out where you're walking. She had the sass that we just hadn't expected from her.
Well, I actually don't think it's character. I think she's actually pretty lippy in real life.
And, of course, some of Francois' best work in the special effects. Francois has been with us since the beginning, and, this headpiece is one of his best things, and the things he did at the end as well. But we love this. Nobody wanted to walk around the top of the body and have to look at it. And when you have special effects that gross out the crew that knows it's fake, you're doing a great job.
And here we go back to an old Saw trick, is the Jigsaw piece. This time it yields a nice bounty.
Every time we sit down to do a movie, we always think, what are we going to do with those Jigsaw pieces? And we've never really, actually, I should say, we have a definite plan for what we're going to do. And when we reveal it in Saw 42, you'll know it was developed early on in the process. But this is something different. Like in the past, you wouldn't have seen flash drives, but we've tried to kind of bring the Saw world into the present day a little bit more computers, flash drives, monitors that are high def. So you won't necessarily.
We still have a couple tape recorders, Jim.
Yeah, but we always, we've always been really clear about not being clear about where we are in the world time-wise and where we are geographically. So, we've always tried to leave it a little bit ambiguous.
Well, I think that was one of the things you guys decided at the very beginning is we didn't want to identify where or when, and that way it wouldn't become it wouldn't become dated. And I think that was a really smart thing.
And then Spirig's new version
of the Billy puppet.
That's right.
I think it was the first thing they said in the first meeting. It's they had they're very opinionated guys.
Really?
And when you deal with twins, you're usually dealing with people who have, the same two opinions. So it's often a double whammy when you're having conversations. But they came in and they said, we want to just play with the Billy puppet. And they're very innovative and adventurous. We've worked with them in the past, and this was one of their real great successes. And I know that James and Lee have seen it and love this new doll. Now, when we scripted this and we had the whole confess, it was before whatever the season 6 was of Game of Thrones. And then Game of Thrones came out, and we were already kind of shooting, and we're like, wait, they have this whole confess thing. What are we going to do?
I didn't even know that. And the worst thing is, I didn't know that, and I actually watched Game of Thrones.
This is an absolutely great set that they built.
Yeah, the crew is really, the crew really gets into these things. And also, it also just shows the athleticism of Laura just throwing herself into it. I mean, all the actors, they're up on these chains. They're really being pulled along. I mean, it's not comfortable. It's not fun, but, they brought a lot to it.
10 minutes after I sold it to him. It's not my fault he's gonna handle such a powerful damn bike, all right?
Now, I think one of the things people like about our movies is that we give depth of character and we give storylines. So getting the flashback to where the people were is always important to us. However, when you're getting into the editing process, you suddenly start to say, like, is story coming at the expense of playability? And so finding the right balance between when to cut back and when not to, is really hard. And this particular scene was probably the hardest one for Kevin to cut together with the Spierigs, because you want to communicate a lot of information, you want to build the tension, but at the same time, you have cutting back and forth to each character and to their flashbacks. And it's really, really hard. And I think this was our biggest piece from the editing. And here's the scare that gets me every time.
Oh my God.
I jump. I'll probably do it right now.
Play the damn tape, Mitch.
Every time. It's like the door in Paranormal Activity. I know it's going to happen, and it still makes me jump.
Those numbers become important later.
While I am certain
Now,
that there is
if you're a really close watcher of the Saw movies, you'll notice that while all the tapes say "Play Me," there's a distinction between the ones that say "Play Me" in black versus the ones that say "Play Me" in red. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you go back and watch all the movies, who writes it and who's delivering the tape, it matters. And so we were very careful to kind of make sure we were consistent all the way through.
the harm that you've done. You chose to do nothing. Now it is you who could die without the right medication.
Now, this is where shooting on location is really great, because we did that alleyway scene right around the corner from a bar, the bar where Logan and Eleanor meet later, which also had great food. So you get to sit and have a nice lunch in between your setups, and then you do your morning, and then you do your afternoon. So it's always a little nicer than going and eating off the same craft service in the stages.
As you can tell, for producers, Mark, myself, Pete, Dan Heffner, food's important.
All you have to do is look at me, and you know that. Yeah, and shout out to Dan Heffner, who's not with us today. He's off working on another movie. These movies don't get made without him.
And by the way, anyone that knows anything about geography, Dan Heffner is going to be shooting an outdoor movie in Winnipeg,
In the winter.
Manitoba, Canada, in January.
If he injected us, there could be marks.
Tell them to invest in Canadian goose, or what is the name of it?
Yeah, something like that.
The biggest mosquitoes in the summer and the biggest snowflakes in the winter, and cold and hot, depending.
It is so cold.
Bingo.
What are you doing? It's okay, it's okay.
So the interesting thing with this scene is always, what's really there and what has to be added later. The syringes need to have the needles in these scenes, but then they have to have them not with the ends when we're shooting and they're flying around. We have to harness the actors. It's really hard work. They have to be leveraged up each and every time. So every time you do a shot of this, there's a lot of setup and a lot of execution.
You're lying!
I was broke, okay? And yes, somebody died, but it wasn't my fault.
Choose, or I'm gonna stick them all into you.
Go, man!
Stop!
Just let her look. Do any of these numbers mean anything to you?
Choose now.
You're crying.
The crazy part about this is Brittany actually makes the decision and tells everybody the answer, and then it happens anyway. She could have just taken the syringe that she knew was the right one, but she was unwilling to do it, and as a result, she dies. This is one of the neat things where we have an interaction between the characters, which we didn't really have in a lot of the other movies, where everybody else has their own self-interest at heart. And, Ryan goes to the dastardly end of sticking her, but if he doesn't, they all die. But she could have prevented it herself.
You got a big man! Hit one now! Come on! Big!
Now, the great thing for Michael and Peter is when they work, they really kind of both could independently shoot a scene, but when they work together, they also take on different roles. So while one of them was working on making sure the rigging was operational and the flyaways were working good, the other one was working with the actors to make sure that everybody's in the moment. Because the key thing is, while it's mostly Ryan and Carly having the dialogue, you really need, Mandela and Laura to kind of be reacting in such a way so that everything feels organic. Usually we're isolating our actors, but this is one where they're all in every shot.
And they're all up in the air, harnessed. Super hot that day, temperature-wise. Nobody was having fun.
Not only was it hot in those stages, but if you remember,
it was
the one
dusty,
mistake we made, the dust
and the grain,
the hay, everybody was sick. No one more so than me. Couldn't
the entire
breathe.
crew was walking around with masks on.
Yeah.
This is a little life lesson for all you boys and girls. Make a decision. Don't sit on a fence. Make a decision. Because one of those three would have been the right choice for her.
It also is testament how far our movies have come and other movies have come. We actually shot this and have, the really gruesomeness of what happens to her. And we were like, oh yeah, this is gonna be hard with the MPA. And it just flew right by. Like most of the scenes, actually, this entire movie flew right by because the movies that have come since our movies, are so much more egregious. But it also has to do with the fact that Oren is the sweet talker. He's the MPAA whisperer. But really, this is one of those situations where we almost felt like we could have gone gorier, but we didn't.
Well, also a little bit of that is we, all of us collectively in the room, Pete, Mark, I, Dan, the Spirigs, Josh and Peter, the writers, Jason, Constantine, Ida, we all really decided to try to bring this more towards Saw 1 and not towards the Saw 2, 3, 4 contests between Eli Roth and Darren Bousman to see who could outgross each other. Not that both guys aren't tremendous directors, but we really wanted to kind of go back to Saw 1, which was a little more logic and a little less gore.
And some jump scares.
Well, that's what Saw 1 is.
Not just from the pig guy jumping out, which we used in other things, but whether it's the syringes dropping or some of the things that happen in the silo room, or when we get to the spiralizer later, like some legitimate things that'll make you jump.
A degenerate gambler. Wife's murder was on him. He owed some bad guys some money.
Did you ever get around to convicting those bad guys?
Scratch marks from fingernails.
The other hard part of this movie is, we want to kind of showcase, the question is, who's doing these killings? Is it Jigsaw? And we wanted a legitimate percentage of the audience to actually think, Jigsaw's alive and is doing these things. And with the Saw franchise, you never know when you are. So is this a flashback movie or is this a progressive movie? So, but, and is Tobin really alive again? Or is it one of these characters? And what you have to do is you have to shine the light on each one of them just enough so that you suspect them, but not so much that they become the obvious red herring. So a lot of the conversation that's in this scene between Logan and Halloran and even Eleanor is kind of to showcase each one of them has expertise, each one of them has suspicions for the other one. And ultimately, you don't want it to be something where somebody thinks, oh, they want us to think it's Logan, so it can't be Logan. Although, in many ways, that's what we did. And again, this is showing you just the vast size of our stage. They walked out of the farm room into this, anteroom for the silo, which is built right that way. It was actually a really fun experience to be able to kind of do it that way because we have a lot of tracking shots that didn't make it into the film, but it allowed us to kind of, have people enter and kind of really have backgrounds that we didn't have to use visual for.
Funny how the stage was in the middle of the forest, Pete. How'd you find a stage like that?
We actually went out to the barn, and you'll see the barn where Eleanor and Logan are, and that is the view from outside the barn to this wilderness. Getting to that barn
But it has nothing to do with the view from where we actually shot the film.
Getting to the barn to actually shoot those sequences was such a nightmare because GPS wouldn't take you to anywhere that was near where it was. Then you had to drive all the way around. It was all fenced in.
Different
it was
entrances.
freezing cold. It was
Do you
raining.
remember how many times we got lost during you and me?
Oh my gosh, Mark and I got lost for even in the prep scout. We were so lost. Then we came back, whatever.
And by the way, for about 30 seconds of material.
Yeah.
If he hadn't fallen asleep, he wouldn't have rolled over and suffocated our baby.
This is one of those scenes where it seems good when you're thinking about it in the room, but then figuring out how you're going to execute it and how the audience will feel about it. It's like trying to figure a way where she could have set up her husband and in many ways been more culpable than he was, and then trying to kind of figure out an alternative answer for how the baby could have died. And then at the end, you get to the point where people are like, killing a baby, like, it's one that you can cut off legs and you can cut off arms and you can do whatever you want. Can't kill a baby. And like, now you tell us.
Another
this right here
Francois.
was a really, really great, well thought out, executed trap that on paper we didn't have any idea how it was going to actually work.
And this is a bunch of different pieces. So we're shooting this scene, this part in one area. This part where you're looking at the leg from underneath is a completely separate thing that we actually, it's a contraption we built in another room.
100 feet away, probably.
Yeah, and so it exists on its own. So all of this is done with a separate camera and a fake leg to kind of make it work in the way it is. Now, the real question for all you Saw fans is, what's the purpose here? And like, if Ryan doesn't step there and his leg doesn't get caught and he doesn't find this thing by trying to get out, how do they ever get in the silo room? And the answer is, ask Josh and Pete. They screwed that part up. We never understood it, but it works really well. And by the way, Josh and Pete, we know it was Pete who screwed it up. Josh, you did great.
Pete, who is now writing in, where is he? Bahrain? Qatar or something.
Yes, if you live in Qatar and are watching this, check out Pete Goldfinger's series. Apparently, it's the #1 show there. In the same way, I remember those guys years ago, the Barbarian Brothers, made a movie for like Avi Lerner called Think Big about twin huge truckers, and it was the #1 film in Egypt. I remember at the time. So that's the same way as Pete Goldfinger's series in Qatar. Yeah, this is one of our favorites. I think that for a lot of Saw movies, it's not about when things get cut that really kind of, makes you cringe and makes your back tighten up. It's about the anticipation of that happening and the idea that these wires could cut through Ryan always makes me kind of queasy.
Please. Yeah, come on. Come on. Come on, man. Oh, my God. You almost got it. I'm trying, dude.
You got it.
Oh, God.
Okay, so we rarely talk about sound, except for how important it is for our movies. But in this scene, that sound, when his hand is near the wires, the instructions that were given, we're going to give a shout out to another movie, to the sound guys were create a sound that's kind of similar to the sound in 127 Hours when James Franco is about to cut his nerve, which is, if you haven't seen that movie, the most unnerving feeling in that movie, and that's what we were trying to go for as his hand was approaching the wires, and hopefully we achieved it somewhat. It's you worry about him, and also you kind of don't want to hear that sound anymore.
The handle, and you will be set free.
Well, he kind of knows what's about to happen to him. He doesn't want to do it, but he knows he doesn't have a choice.
Yeah. And this is her ad lib.
What does he mean, set free?
This is great.
Good luck, Lollipop.
Harkening back, Laura is fantastic. One of the best actresses we've ever worked with, and she had some great notes as we were going through the movie, and that was one of them where she'd clearly read other people's dialogue and was familiar enough, and she just threw that in there, and it becomes one of the best lines.
It's a virus, mostly known because when swine get it, farmers have to wipe out the entire sounder.
I'm impressed. Keep digging.
And this is a great little note about an obscure disease, and I'm sure this came from Josh Stolberg and not Pete Goldfisher.
Well, we couldn't find the right actress. Remember, it took us forever? Yeah. And we finally found Hannah Anderson.
Yep.
Now this
was the last person hired.
Now this was a truncated scene because we actually shot the body falling off the roof and landing and getting a visual on it, and it just never looked great. And our thinking has always been, and this is something that Mark and Oren have insisted on from the beginning, is if it's not great, doesn't go in. And and so we had to kind of work around the parts that worked. We weren't going to go back and reshoot it. It wasn't that important, but at the same time, you needed the information. So we had to just cut into the scene at the very end, and hopefully people got the sense of that this was Carly's character when clearly it was the double. So we had to go back later in and get a bunch of ADR to kind of like tell people the story, because we couldn't really show them that story.
Do you still have the doll at home with you that we used here, Pete?
I can't admit to that. I can't deny it either.
Look, here. This is the injection point. The vein carried it all the way to the heart where it's singed.
How'd you know it was hydrofluoric acid?
Saw a lot of it in Fallujah.
It was funny, when we started out thinking about the story for this, we all said the same thing. Let's try to stay away from procedural. Let's try to stay away from, medical. And then next thing you know, we have cops and coroners. And we just, it's like Godfather 3. We just keep getting pulled in that direction.
You got captured, but not before taking out 3 Taliban. What I heard, they tortured the shit out of him. Spent months in the VA hospital when he got back.
Think he snapped?
Come on, man, you're talking about a brother here.
I got a brother, he's a fucking asshole.
And that's Pete and
I've always
Josh.
liked that line.
Pete and Josh come from a comedy background. They did Sorority Row, but they've done a bunch of comedies as well. And there's a lot of funny lines in this. And sometimes when they get delivered deadpan, they're even funnier.
Just so you know, Pete and Josh, we brought in to do some writing on Loudermilk, the TV show that Pete Farrelly just did with Ron Livingston.
I didn't know that. How'd they do?
Great.
That's awesome.
We're actually bringing them back for next year if the show gets picked up.
That's cool. So that means Pete doesn't have to go all the way to Beirut. Where is it again?
Qatar.
Qatar to get a job?
Correct.
That's great. Good for you. His wife will probably be, maybe not. 50-50, she's happy.
Exactly.
You have them in the same time zone.
Moving on from the shameless plug for Mark's show on Direct. So begs the question about not only why would they go into the silo, but when we wrote it, we were like, we never really thought about shooting in a silo. And the guys in production design, who are great almost all the time, hadn't really kind of like talk about shooting yourself into a corner or building yourself into a corner. So this is a great silo scene. And then as we got in there, we realized, how the hell are we going to get a camera in here? And the Spirit Brothers came up with some really inventive ways to drop a camera from the top. And then we cut around the back of the silo and had to take out the whole back piece to shoot a lot of this. I'd love to say it was all anticipated ahead of time, but we had to kind of make some revisions as we were going. The other thing that's really fascinating about this scene in the grain, when we get to it later, is how that was done with a little bit of a curtain and a canopy, and I'll talk a little bit about that later.
We gotta get the remote.
And this was a scene that really kind of kept building as we were going through it. We would start out and we just said, oh, they'll go into this room and they'll get locked in this circular room. And then we were like, well, there's not really anything there. And I remember when we started, it was going to be water, wasn't it? And then when we decided we were like, we've done kind of the water with Scott Patterson before. And then we decided it would be ants or maggots. And then somebody said, well, didn't we kind of do that once with something else? So we went with the grain, and then really at the very last minute, we said, well, there's grain, but is it really elevated enough for a Saw movie? So somebody came up with the bright idea of dropping really sharp implements on them, which seemed like it was more random, but great visual for the movie. So we went with it anyway.
The choices you have made may cost you your life. You cannot escape the truth. There is, however, one person who can help you. Ryan. If he pulls the lever before you're buried alive.
So normally when people shoot scenes like this, you shoot them independently. But what we did was we tried to have Ryan sitting outside doing his lines as though he was in close proximity, because dealing with the voices and what they could hear. So while Laura and Mandela were actually in the silo, Ryan was right outside kind of doing his stuff so that they could play off each other. Because the hard part about this is you're in 2 different places with people doing 2 very different actions but reacting to the exact same thing that they're seeing on the screen. And so we had to kind of time it right. All right, so
And this is a part. This part here is it just scares me to death. Just being buried alive or potentially buried alive. It just this one even
Rice Krispies.
Yeah, in Rice Krispies.
We had tons and tons of grain. Do you remember the thousands and thousands of pallets? I mean, it was.
So we overordered.
We did, and it comes into play later because everybody was thinking it would all be contained in the silo for much of the time until I came up with the romancing the stone bride idea later, which we'll get to. But so what happens is we shoot this scene from the top as we're filling it up, and then what we do is we pulled them out and we built a canopy. So they're actually standing below it, and we've built a canopy right around their shoulders so the grain sits on top of it. So it gives the impression that they've sunk in the grain, but really they're just standing normally, and we're just dropping the things from the top, some actual practical and some visual effects, but they're completely dry and there's nothing below them, but there's this nice little skirt. And it really worked great. And it gives the impression that they're swimming and falling in the grains.
Where were you the night Malcolm Neal got murdered?
Now this is a Mark Berg scene. You were looking at the film and we were shooting, and you were like, I need more. I need to know why he suspects her. I need to kind of throw some line on it. If you remember, this was written by Josh and Pete on the fly to kind of throw some suspicion. We were most of the way through shooting. I think now everybody says it's a great Mark Berg scene. I think at the time we had to shoot it when we had no time. Everybody thought it was awful Mark Berg scene.
It was a 18-hour day, and I was like, no, we're still going to shoot. And they're like, no, we don't have time. And I was like, no. You wrote it. We're going to shoot it. And it turned an 18-hour day to a 20-hour day.
Is that all she is? It's been 2 years since Christine passed. I wouldn't blame you.
Making movies is often about doing what you don't want to do, that you have to do, and trying to lose things that you want because you just don't have time to get them, and trying to get that as a balancing act is really hard.
We knew if we didn't get it then, we'd never get it. It was the last day.
And it's hard because you have to manage the people and their expectations, and they're tired, and we need a turnaround time, and you have to keep going, and it's very hard to get people motivated to do that when they've been doing it for 3 weeks. So you try to push it to a Friday, but you don't always have that luxury.
Well, so we did the most probably setups we'd ever done in a Saw movie one day, and Mark added a scene. But the great news about that is when you add a scene, and we actually used it. So the worst part would have been if he added a scene and we didn't use it.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard for the directors to say no, considering they wrote it.
but
it's actually not that hard for them to say no.
The other difficulty is, there's usually a dichotomy.
Speaking of the directors,
people who don't want to, to be on and feel like we've shot enough, we should come back tomorrow, and the crew who largely wants to keep going and get it done because they're there. They have families, they want to get home, and it's so trying to find the right balance between the creative and the output. Now, Mark, you should talk about this scene a little bit.
Yeah, Buckethead. Can you do it?
This is Arabella Oz, whose dad is the talk show host and famous heart surgeon, Dr. Mehmet Oz.
It's an exact match.
And while that might be why she got the role, she was fantastic. Everybody was so impressed with her. Not only did she came in and knowing her lines, that's pretty easy, but she was really good. She was very believable. She was, she was really helpful to the other actors. And I know that when she was done, we all looked at each other and said, we wish we had more for her to do. I hope we get to work with her again in the future.
Dad's a doctor.
and she doesn't die.
Yeah. It's a great shot. The way this was done, that I don't know who came up with, the way this is all set up and everything between production design and the Spirigs and Pete Block, everyone that was there. This is amazing when they're going back and forth, and this is could be my favorite scene in the movie because he knows what's coming, but he just can't do it.
Now, just because I talked about the ease of them being underneath the canopy didn't mean it was enjoyable to be there. We were dropping stuff and having to clean the hair, but the dust was flying, the grain was flying, it was getting in Mandela's mouth and Laura's mouth. It was just awful. And then we started actually so some of these implements are on strings and they drop, others are visual effects, but the truth of the matter is, you've got to have them reacting to what they can't do. So This is one of my favorite scenes where we have the thing dropping in front of Laura, and then as we get to the end when they spill out. So the whole inspiration for them spilling out was the scene in Romancing the Stone, that's one of my all-time favorite guilty pleasure movies, for those of you who haven't seen it. And Danny DeVito, Michael Douglas, and Kathleen Turner, and they tumble down this water slide in the jungle, and he ends up in her lap. And that is the inspiration for Laura tumbling out at the pitchfork, which nobody was really happy with that we had to do, but it worked out really great. We had to go back and do it again to make it work, and I think it turns out to be one of the better little moments of the movie.
And the nails going into her arm, it's something they wanted to cut. And I think
I actually was arguing again in favor of cutting it, and you guys said no, shoot
that
it.
was Mark left this to me. He goes, "It's your call." And
it was really hard. Dropping all the thing. Here comes the Laura spilling out, and she sells it great. It's a combination of her selling it, and she's such a great actress, the music mix and Kevin's editing to kind of make that work, because obviously we aren't throwing her at the pitchfork, though it was a live pitchfork and it was live Laura. But yeah, you're right about the nails. It was a very frustrating day in the silo, and we did want to cut that out. We needed to make up some time, and you guys insisted we shoot it, and I'm glad we did.
Turn your phone off?
And yet here you are. You found
Yeah,
me.
so this was one of the early scenes we shot, and okay, this
With
is
a bottle
my...
of tequila.
Do you want to talk about the tequila
look
a
at
little
the
bit, Mark?
tequila. Wow, there's tequila on
Shameless plug number 2.
Did you know there was tequila in the bar?
Did not. Go ahead, Mark.
It's really good tequila.
What's the name brand of it?
I'm not allowed to plug stuff, Pete. You know
Yes,
that.
you are. I'll do it. I can't remember the name.
Codico.
Codico. By the way, and I'm not just saying this because Mark is my partner and he invests in this company, the tequila tastes really good. And unfortunately, I've sampled too much of it, but hey, I started out margaritas, then on the raw, now I just drink it.
I became very
Thanks
popular that night when we struck this set, and there were all those bottles, and I started breaking up the shots. The other thing that this should be known for, because every so often, we sit here as if we know everything. So every so often, somebody makes the mistake of not turning off their cell phone and having it run when you're shooting a scene. So I would never do anything like that. However, I did set an alarm to remind myself to turn off my cell phone, and the alarm went off during this scene. And yeah, that would be me. How many movies and how long's the IMDb page? And I made the mistake.
No way.
Oh yeah, that was me. It allowed everybody to yell at the producer just once.
Yeah, well, but then you were giving him tequila an hour later, so how bad could it have
I
been?
think that's why I gave them the tequila.
You only put 2 bottles in my room, so that's called a good partner.
So the other thing about Hannah, which is really funny, is she's not in a lot of scenes, but she's a pivotal character. But we spent more time talking about her wardrobe than anything else, because everybody wanted to give her this edgy feel. So we had to come up with all these reasons for her to change outfits so that she wouldn't just be in scrubs. Because you have a pretty girl who's going to be you want people to remember. You can't just have them be in hospital scrubs the whole time. So that's kind of why this bar scene was created. And we were wondering, how did she get from the morgue to here? And then she goes back home right after this, and she's in a completely different outfit.
The movie magic. Also, the music in the background became such a hassle for this.
Yeah, finding the right cue for that.
Oh, man.
Well, because when we wrote it and we were thinking about the music, she was kind of a punk rocker chick, and then she just never ended up playing that way. So when we were originally thinking about ideas, the whole idea of the Darknet and Jigsaw fan base was a much bigger storyline, which we may come back to at some point, but that's where this comes from. And so this was one of the earlier scenes of her having this studio and having people who regale in the whole legend of Jigsaw and build his traps and things like that. This was also done in the old soap factory, and we had to actually go and try to find all the old traps that we had, some of which we had to create because it turns out that they were already been sold on the internet, and we had to recreate them for the first time.
By the way,
The set was a great set.
By the way, who would think a soap factory would be dirty?
It's true. Jumbo shrimp.
That soap factory is disgusting.
So the biggest note about this scene is what you're not seeing. Now, you may be able to find it in some, I don't know how iTunes does their deleted scenes or things like that, if we have an expanded cut, but
You guys recognize all the old traps, by the way?
Yeah. You see the Scott Patterson drowning
Scott
one?
Patterson drowning.
the gun from number 2.
Yep. The eye shot.
The chest opener that Dina Myers was trapped
For
in.
years, I had that gun in my office on the door facing out for people
Did
who
you really?
wanted to come in. Yes, I did.
I did not know that.
I loved it, and I had to give it back. We had this whole sequence where, Logan finds the spiralizer, and he actually goes up in it, and we see how it works. And the whole reason why it's there is to kind of set it up so that when you later see the spiralizer in the farm room, you think, oh, it must be Eleanor. However, when we were editing the movie, it was just was playing too long. It was just not kind of coming through together, and we actually had to excise this whole scene where Logan goes up in a harness. He's trapped by Hannah, by Eleanor, and then he's lowered in thinking he's going to die, and then she's about to kill him, only to find out that it's rubber blades. And what it would have done is it would have played off nicely against the scene that follows in the farmhouse, but it just wasn't working for our purposes.
It was. I think it was actually Oren who said, "Let's try it without it."
He built one.
I hated to lose it because it was so hard to shoot, and because of what
it
it
was
did
a full
as a
day.
story.
It was
Right,
a full day of filming, pretty much.
But also, and this is the lesson for you filmmakers, when you have a great story point, it isn't necessarily a great movie point. And when you're making the movie matters, not the script. And while it was hugely important in the script, it just wasn't working in the movie.
Even though I was in Saw 1, I think I could have done a good job, a better job than this guy, being the guard outside the room.
Well, what's really hard is to be an actor in a movie like this where we don't want to pay you to have lines. So you have to do your entire thing without saying anything. And, but yeah, it's, I would have liked to have seen Oren Kulis in that role. All right, so obviously everybody kind of knows how the trick, where you bury the leg and do this. But for Paul, he actually had to lie there the whole time, his leg buried, and us, having the tourniquet on him. Now, it wasn't as long as Tobin had to lie in the first Saw movie, but there he was lying on that hay block for pretty much the whole day.
And there's my daughter in a scene that I'm very familiar with, her sleeping.
And the Fallujah scars.
You think?
Great work.
Now, what's interesting, though, is the scars are kind of crisscross, and yet the blades are horizontal only, so hopefully nobody's judging us too harshly on that.
I wasn't there that day.
You want to calm the people's fears.
Are you serious? Chasing a dead man. This is election year, bullshit.
Okay, so this was a scene we had to actually reshoot. It didn't come out great the first time we shot it, so we shot it the very last day that we were shooting. The only problem is by the time we got around to the very last day,
Callum
had
lost his voice.
and couldn't speak. So this little teeny scene took 2 days of shooting on 2 separate days, and then a full day of ADR to when he had his voice back. And again, it's how much information do you want to put about Logan? Because you put too much and it looks like you're shining the light too broadly. You put too little and nobody knows why it's there.
How does he just disappear?
He's still breathing.
Now, for those of you who are asking, how does Jigsaw know when to turn on the lights, and how does Jigsaw know when to open doors and things like that? There was a scene in the script and in one of the early versions that didn't make it, where we actually cut back around the backside of these sets, and you'd actually see John Kramer, Jigsaw, looking through a hole. You'd see a silhouette of a guy looking through, and then we would actually, later on when you were doing it, you'd see it was Logan with the people in the new ones, and it just became too complicated. For us, coming up with twists is great. Coming up with twists which are easy for people to understand is a little bit harder, not because the audience can't comprehend it, but you ask them to do a lot. They're watching a scene to visually get inspired by it. They're listening to dialogue and they're trying to process it. And it's like if you give them too much to do, it all goes over the audience's head. And sometimes, you know, and the worst thing you hear is when an executive says, yes, but they'll get it the second time they see the movie. You know, you can't, you know, make your movies based on the idea that somebody's going to see it the second time. So modulating how much information you throw at them at once is the hard part.
He was my nephew, and he never hurt anyone. The device you see here has a unique power source. It's the same engine that graced the bike you sold my
Now, Oren was instrumental in this part because nobody knew anything about motorcycles, but Oren knows everything about everything automotive. And it was both the guy who was riding the motorcycle in the truck scene and this scene, you were like telling everybody everything technical about these motorcycles and when they were built and stuff like that. And I learned a ton, but I could tell you were in your element.
Just trying to make sure we had everything correct and authenticity.
So if the prior scene in Eleanor's studio had happened, you'd be kind of thinking like, great, like I wanted to see it last time, now I get to see it. Now without that, you know, it becomes a different type of scene, but it actually plays really well for Mandela. But it was very hard to kind of get a sense of how fast these were spinning when they weren't there at the time, lowering Mandela, having Laura do her, you know, Laura Croft impersonation, and then having Charlie come up with music that kind of, you know, drove everything.
And great special visual effects here.
And again, this was a gag which we'd never really done before in a Saw movie, where we kind of almost had a payoff, and then there's a break and a little bit of, you know, relief, and then it happens. And that was something we intentionally had thought about trying to find a way to incorporate into the script when we were setting about developing it with Josh and Pete. We're like, we need a moment where somebody appears to get out of a trap, because we've often built these movies. In the beginning, it was like you wanted the people to get out of the traps, but then the audience kind of demanded, we want to see the traps happen. So, you know, you can't have everybody get killed and you can't have everybody escape. So with this, we get both.
Cuisinart.
This is my favorite response.
Edgar Munson was in a coma.
Finally, in a Saw movie, we get intentional laughs. We've had unintentional laughs before. This is the one movie where we actually got some. I'm not saying we won't have unintentional ones too, but we got some we wanted.
Yeah.
Anything?
Great scene, by the way. Please pay attention.
All right, so this is one of these scenes where the producers argue amongst themselves about when to reveal the body and whose it is. And we spent a lot of time going back and forth about where the shot of Edgar
Even
should be.
after it was shot, after it was shot also.
Yeah.
Forgetting the script, but
No,
even
the editing.
And who reacts to it and how much and what's inside the truck.
Yeah. So and I think it works really well. You guys have it here. I wanted to put it at the very back after he says, you know, you can call off the search, but I think that people couldn't get a sense about who it was in time, and they needed all this information to go, oh, Edgar. Right.
So the bigger question, if it's Edgar Munson in the casket, what happened to John Kramer?
He may still be alive.
You just don't know where he is.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Ask Tobin. He'll tell you he's still alive on the French Riviera with Chianti and some fava beans.
What's the left? Eyes up.
The head trap.
Now, the hardest thing about this entire movie is trying to give the impression that there's only one game going on, and yet have the reveal at the end that there's two games going on with these same people in the same traps. We learned a lesson in Saw 4 that if you hold back the information till the end, you run the risk of people not quite being able to piece it together. On the other hand, we didn't want to kind of let people know early, so it's really hard to kind of make it be where people we want them to see this body and think it's Mandela who we just saw, and yet you'll see that like later on in the movie we have to kind of very much go back to these exact same scenes to kind of say person A, person B, trap, old trap, new trap. Again, conceptually works great when you're scripting, but harder when you're editing and you want the audience to follow. The interesting thing about this is the exact same alleyway where Edgar drove up in the opening scene and ran up. He ran off on the left side of it, and this building was on the. No, he ran off on the right side of it. This building was on the left side of it.
Yeah, you and Eleanor in your warehouse.
And as we moved out, there were 3 other productions coming in to use that same alleyway. Remember?
And very soon that's going to be a whole, something like 22 acres or something, and it's going to be a whole village in Toronto.
We won't be able to use it again?
No. Like every place we've ever shot.
Right, every place we ever shot is condos.
And Mark and I did John Q back in 2000. We all shot movies in Toronto. Literally, we've watched the city grow in front of our eyes. Every time you leave, come down the garden or leaving the highway, this condo's farther and farther and farther towards the airport. It's amazing. Except if you want to try to get around anywhere downtown in an Uber, you go about 3 cars a block.
And Dan
we shot this side in Etobicoke, the interior of the apartment.
Now, Dan Hefner's been talking about buying a condo in Toronto since we shot Saw 3, and I think the same condo he's been looking at is now increased like 3-fold in cost. So,
all of us, believe me, all of us have just watched it go.
Going back years. Now these latest Jigsaw murders, the 3 bodies you brought you, we found they're all mixed up in Halloran's cases.
Bring him in.
So this was a scene that Pete and Josh had to write towards the end of the screenwriting process, because at some point you have to say, okay, we have to dispel some of our red herrings and kind of direct it, and we just weren't getting there. So we had to kind of basically tell the audience why they should suspect Halloran. We wanted them to suspect Halloran anyway, and it just wasn't coming through. So we needed Logan to kind of lay out the case for Keith as to why they should, because at this point we definitely didn't want them thinking about Logan anymore. We wanted them to think a little bit about Eleanor, but we really had to get them off the Logan track. And just a word about Matt Passmore. So he was somebody who Oren had known from his work on The Glades and brought him to our attention. So I just remember the very first meeting we had with Matt. Mark and I had to go to dinner with him, and we were trying to have a conversation, and Matt was very into his character. And throughout the entire production, Matt and Tobin really could talk about the characters in Jigsaw forever. But I just remember all Mark and I wanted to do was watch the ball game and order dinner and hang out with Matt, and we couldn't get the waitress to pay any attention to us because she just kept staring at and talking to Matt the entire time that we wanted to order. You remember?
It's actually a good sign, though, when you're hiring a leading man that...
He looks every bit the leading man. And
when we were doing Mrs. Winterbourne, we were going to hire Matthew McConaughey, and he just done Boys on the Side or whatever. And literally, he came walking down this long halls at the old Polygram building, and every girl assistant was like turning their heads, and then you could see him DMing or IM back then, and we're like, wow. And then they came back to us like a week later when we were making the deal and said he just got offered the lead to Joel Schumacher's A Time to Kill. And
oh, really?
We said, let him out.
I was working at Disney on Color of Money and theatrical marketing, and I had to walk Tom Cruise out to his motorcycle. And as I walked down between the buildings, people would just be pressed up against the windows. And I'm really junior at the time, and Tom turns to me and goes, "Is that because of you?"
It's actually great.
One of my great moments. So the funny part about Halloran's car is it was actually one of the cars of one of the guys on the crew, and it was the loudest thing in the world. We spent more time putting sound into this movie in every other scene and trying to take the car sound out of every time Halloran was driving, because he insisted on using his car, and it literally sounded like bulldozers coming down the street each and every time.
By the way, look how strong this girl is.
Laura was terrific. And so here's the cheat that some people have issues with, because she actually is able to get out. And you're inspired to do, and then Jigsaw says, "Yeah, not so fast." And or actually, yeah, it is Jigsaw. It's John Kramer at the time, but it's really kind of some people felt it was a cheat when we tested the movie that she actually escaped. I will tell you, this one shot, the Spierigs wanted the Dutch angle, and they were very precise about what they wanted. It took us so long to set up. and nobody was really sure how it was going to work. It worked out great, but trying to figure out where the camera needed to be, and though I have my strengths, figuring out which line of the camera actors need to be on and where it needs to be is not one of them. And I can never wrap my hands around how they were shooting that shot. Now, this also was another piece that we had to craft late in the story writing part. We knew that we needed Jigsaw. We needed Tobin to have time. We always need Tobin to have some screen time, and we want it. The audience loves it. We love it. Tobin is so great. We kind of wish we hadn't killed him off in number 3. I'm sure that's a whole nother conversation. But so we needed him to have something to do. The problem was we gave him something to do, and he talked over it, and it was this very elaborate thing where he takes apart this contraption here. But then as we were kind of playing the movie out, we kind of said, it's not quite working, so we need to keep everything he's saying, but we need to kind of like eliminate everything he's doing. It was really hard editing experience for Kevin.
Well, it always comes down to how much Tobin do you want and how much do you need. You can't do it without him.
But he's also so captivating.
But his process and
what's
his
interesting about
is
when you make a
slow,
Saw movie
and it kind of
and Tobin comes on the set, even the actors who are in the movie are excited to see him. He's that guy, and the crew gets excited, and Tobin handles it really, really well.
You want me to show mercy? You hasn't taken even a single step toward confessing. You who's responsible not for 1 death, but for 3.
And by the way, had it been a scene that happened at the beginning of the movie, he's right. It would have. He does it great, and he says some interesting stuff, and what he takes apart is great. It's just when you're in, minute 82 of a 90-minute movie, you want to kind of get towards the end, and you don't want to kind of slow down the momentum that you have.
You lied to the authorities multiple times, Ryan.
Oren talked about it a little bit at the beginning about all the number of exterior scenes that we have, and this one has more than any other. We really had it for the first time in the last movie when we did the big scene in the square, and then this one there's so many, all the flashbacks, and obviously the opening. The hard part about that is, if you want nighttime scenes, you're shooting at night, and that means you have to adjust your schedule accordingly. And for Dan Hefner, the hard part was we wanted to go all our locations early and then move into the stage.
Well, it was it was because of weather. We were shooting in Toronto in November, and eventually you're going to run out of. We got really lucky, and you don't want to run out of your luck.
Right. The hard part was we had very full flashback scenes, and then we were running a little bit over when we were on stage, and we really wish we had those days back to be able to excise some of the flashbacks the way we ended up cutting them anyway. But it's just, as Oren says, it's the way you have to shoot it. You have to prepare for weather.
You know me.
But no, we were really excited. I mean, our main direction with sitting with the Spierigs was to make a Saw movie and not make it Saw 8. Not just another, in the series of, but, they wanted to change the color. They wanted to change the sound. They wanted to change the look. And I think they did a tremendous job.
Why are you doing this to me?
Really, really did. I mean, it feels every bit the Saw movie. And at the same time, it doesn't look like, everything else we've done before.
A lot of history. There's a lot of, for the fans, or especially the diehard fans, there's a ton of nuggets. I know there's another word you use, not nuggets. What do you use?
Kernels?
Kernels, I don't know, something. But there's a lot
Easter
of
eggs?
even like just seeing Tobin here, drawing the tricycle. There's a lot of fun with this.
Well, the big thing about him drawing the tricycle is, do you know how many discussions we had about hair? We always have a lot of discussions about Tobin's hair, Tobin's beard, Tobin's little, what do you call that?
Tobin refused to shave his head.
What do you call that thing?
Soul patch.
Flavor saver?
Yeah, the little soul patch thing. I think that the interesting thing about it is, and Dan Hefner, I think he's the expert on Tobin's hair, because each variation of his hair is a different time in his life and in his cancer treatment.
Well, Dan has pictures of Tobin's hair from Saw 1, every scene of Saw 1 through Saw 7, just to make sure we're in the right place. But it's also amazing how well Tobin has held up, so to speak. How little he's aged in the
by the way,
14 years that it's 14 years from the first time we met him. And he looks virtually the same.
And I actually think he's in better shape now. Mark and I spent a lot of time with him last week, And he's in great shape, doing great.
For who you are.
We all had the chance last week to go to the Halloween Horror Nights at Universal and walk through the Saw maze with Tobin, and kind of surreal for our kids and for us to kind of experience the traps and kind of go through it, and with Tobin kind of leading the way. That was actually one of the highlights for me.
I didn't.
You didn't go through the trap, but
No, here you go.
by the way, I just got to say this. Yes, we went to Universal. Yes, Tobin was there, but the highlight for me was watching LeBron James go through the Saw maze and be frightfully scared.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was there screaming.
No way.
Yeah, it was
I
pretty
looked
cool.
over to the guy screaming next to me and was only looking at his belt buckle. And then I looked up and I go, "Hey, champ."
Well, that's funny. You know, I saw on like TMZ or something, they showed like all of them leaving, and I didn't realize it was the same night.
Yeah.
They were leaving Universal.
My daughter Zoe yelled at me because I didn't recognize the Kardashians he was with. So this is the night we were talking about that was so cold, so rainy. We were kind of always working ahead of the weather, and it's literally just for this little drive up scene and for them entering.
And by the way, if you're a Hannah Anderson fan, I'm sure it's one of the versions of this, there'll be an outtake, but there's an amazing shot of Hannah Anderson from behind that we actually had to cut because it was, believe it or not, a long shot, fully clothed, and it was too provocative to even use in the movie.
I think somebody has a poster of it.
Okay, we need to bring him in now.
Puzzle pieces.
So you think about the little things you want to do, like even with the way Halloran is holding his gun and trying to catch the light. Very important to the spear eggs, you know, where the light goes, what it glints off of, where the flashlights hit. They're very precise workers. As for me, it was my third experience with them, having bought their first film, Undead, which if you hadn't seen it, is a great little zombie sci-fi horror comedy. And then overseeing and producing Daybreakers, which is their vampire movie, and you know, each time they get more precise, more particular, more obstinate, but also more interesting. And it was really kind of interesting to see how they operate together and then how they work with the crew. But a lot of everything that they did in this movie is storyboarded. Usually you have director who has a shot list and they have some storyboards. They storyboarded every single shot they did, which is interesting, except for when you're trying to make your days and they're insistent upon hitting each one of those things. But, you know, if it wasn't for that, you know, we wouldn't have all the pieces of material that we needed.
That's a lot of blood. What's the bet this is where Buckethead was decapitated?
So this is the really pivotal sequence for us because what we're trying to do is condense and collapse our storylines. You want to believe that what's happening with Laura and Jigsaw and Ryan in this room is actually happening at the exact same time that Logan and Eleanor are there and that Halloran is following. It's really a precise concept in terms of sound and trying to have certain sounds hearken to certain experiences, but also in terms of the cutting. It is a lesson that we learned from Saw 4, where we really tried to develop the idea that we had two parallel storylines. We went too fast in that one, as I mentioned before, and so this one, it was very much let the scenes play out, let sounds and words and phrases trigger what's happening. Hopefully, people will be thinking about Halloran and Eleanor about to meet up with Jigsaw. If they did that, we did our job well.
Now, if you want to achieve your freedom, you have to learn. You have to realize that you've been doing it backwards.
So this was some of the last dialogue that we ended up writing. Josh Stolberg and myself were sitting on set, and we knew what we wanted to do, and we knew what we needed to have happen with the shotguns shells, and we really just could not figure out a way. And the fellow who's the one of the production designers on set actually said a couple of words to us, which really gave us the key for how we would manage the shotgun shells and the coloring and things like that. Because, you know, we knew where everybody was supposed to be. We just didn't know how to make it so that why the gun would explode and what they were supposed to do. And it was actually finalized with hours to go.
You have one shell.
You almost don't want to talk during this scene. It's such an amazing scene, and it's like almost like Tobin's soliloquy. So.
But it also is a testament to the actors. And
there you go.
Yeah,
you go.
No, Oren was like, whatever happens, you have to have the shot of
Tobin
Jigsaw
closing the
door. But it's a testament to the actors because you write these things and then you kind of get into the space and you're not sure how the choreography will go. But Tobin, Laura, and Paul, really kind of sat and figured out, how do we move with our chains? How do we get around this space? And Laura was instrumental in terms of how her character and Ryan's character would actually have their little tete-a-tete at the end. It wasn't how we had planned it, and yet the way she came up with actually really kind of made the scene work really great. Her indecision, her making the choice. We'll get to that in a minute.
You know damn well I didn't kill Buckethead. Or the other two.
Then who did?
Halloran. You said it yourself. The bullet matches. He's connected to all the victims.
Right behind you. Drop it. Drop it! Both of you! No!
So you learn things during production, like maybe don't have the girl running and also put her in high heels. But live and learn. And then we sent her out into the marsh area where she kept sinking because she was wearing the same shoes. And we had to swap her shoes out.
And by the way, with the biggest gun known to man.
Exactly.
Like last time a gun was that big, Clint Eastwood used it in Dirty Harry. Look at that thing.
Yeah. That's a good girl.
And I won't say who Eleanor was modeled after in terms of her looks and her wardrobe. I will only say that she was modeled after someone in particular who may actually be watching.
He wants us to shoot each other.
By the way, we would be so negligent in not talking about just watching this shot, how amazing this is Ben Knott. I'm just going to cue you up, Mark and Pete. Just talk about Ben Knott for a second.
We're going to refer to him as our DP, and yet, by the time this comes out, he probably should be a director by now. He is one of the best DPs we've ever had. So smart. Kind of a junior producer on the movie.
And great calming influence.
Mm-hmm.
Calming influence, but he designed lots of the shots. Just really, really smart, and he's done all the Spielberg brothers.
Yeah, that
movies.
was a great part of the is to have that dynamic between the two Spielberg brothers and Ben. The look of this film and just watching that shot and watching this is Ben is beyond calling him a DP of this movie is insulting.
And well worth the additional flight from
Melbourne,
Australia.
He's every bit of backwards!
Oh, he told her not to do it.
And the Spielberg brothers and Ben really just working together. I mean, this is telling an entire story visually. Like a couple of lines about backwards, Ryan processing, seeing the red, seeing the lock. I mean, the concept needs to be there smartly for the audience where it doesn't feel like it's spoon-fed, but at the same time in a way which is dramatic. They did a great job
and
with
that
the
they'll
sequence.
get it. I mean, because it's so easy when you've read something 100 times and shot it to understand everything that's going on. But the balance is trying to get people to understand a little nuance, like the key and the color and the two locks. And I think Ben and the Spielbergs, they blocked this and shot it so well.
Use your key to freedom.
Again, just great acting.
And of course, he's setting it up to be like the final girl who, doesn't survive is kind of our trademark. But then it was really important to have them die in such a way where you kind of remembered where they were and what had happened, because when you see the shriveled corpses later on, you want to be able to instantaneously understand that time has passed without anybody saying it. It was something we talked about all the time.
Once or twice.
Yeah. Okay, so this last trap is all Spirigs. And we had a different trap in mind, and I'm not going to say what it is because we may use it in another movie. I hope we get to make another movie.
How do you take the head trap and make it 10 years later and still be a head trap, still be cool, still be exciting, unlike the head trap that Shawnee was in, that Oren was in way back when?
Right, and it feels like we've entered into a new era. But I remember the Spirig brothers pitching it, and we all kind of looked like,
I didn't get it.
They're doing what?
I didn't really get it.
It'd always been a movie about practical effects, and this was going to be some visual effects, and this was going to be lasers, and there was a lot of discussion about how to convey how hot it was, and that's why we had to insert the laser cutting scene in the morgue earlier to kind of showcase how these lasers worked. Oh, and then, of course, Oren's, you can't see this at home, but Oren's pointing at the ceiling to remind us to talk about the ceiling part. And he's right. It's why we added the scene later on where, not only where Halloran looks up and sees that the ceiling has burned for himself, but not for Logan, but also we wanted it to happen because it does two things. It shows that real lasers for him, not for Logan, but it also shows how hot they were. But I think that for all of us, this was the scene. Not just how would we shoot it that was a concern, but how would it play to an audience, because we just haven't worked with visual effects and needed to in these movies. So if you saw blood, at least it was movie blood. If you saw a blade, you knew there was a blade there. This was a lot of stuff we were going to be building, 4 months after we finished shooting, and that's nerve-wracking.
Select one of you to begin.
But Spirig brothers were adamant and did a great job. And Tony and his team, building this room to be the room that Laura and Ryan were in earlier. And I apologize. Sometimes I use the actors' names, sometimes I use the characters' names. But to make it an updated version of that, again, trying to subtly let 10 years later. Oh wait, I'm not supposed to say 10 years later, am I?
Anyway, Tony's also our
some years later.
Tony's our production designer. Did an incredible job.
And he owns a great bar up the PCH
Highway
in Malibu.
1, called Highway 1.
Go by, ask for Tony. Ask for the sod discount.
All right, John Kramer, it was me. It was me. I fucked up. I messed up your x-rays.
Again, another conversation for us. Logan's sort of confessing to something. We didn't know what he was going to confess to. Halloran has to believe that there's a confession, but what he says, wasn't getting to that level. And then Keith came through and really kind of made it work.
Christine, I'm so sorry, baby. I should have been there for you. I wasn't.
Your turn, detective.
So one of the great things about making a Saw movie is the number of changes of wardrobe you have to have. And I think we blew through 10 shirts on Logan that day. Sometimes the lasers weren't quite working.
So here's the lasers on the ceiling. You see, just when they get turned on, they completely scorch the ceiling, beyond scorch. And we wanted to get to the moment where kind of the game over moment, or the moment when in Saw 1 where Tobin Jigsaw stands up, and we wanted him to realize all of a sudden that the gig was up, and it's when he looks at the ceiling.
But of course, the lasers start in a circle and they should come all the way to the center when he looks up, and they don't. Because it was one of those things, if we did that, it would be entirely blackened out, and we really wanted to kind of send the message. They worked here, but they were working the whole time.
So this for us is this great moment where he sees the ceiling, and all of a sudden he looks up and the ceiling isn't burned. And for us, it's like,
give the audience a moment to process.
And the oh shit moment for Detective Halloran.
And the great thing about it is, at this point, some people are going to I knew it was Logan. And of course, you knew it was Logan because we told you it was Logan early in the movie.
Yeah.
And then we tried to tell you it wasn't Logan. And Logan tried to tell you it wasn't Logan. So, for all of you who are saying you knew it was, we're sure you did. And we're hoping that there was a point at which you doubted yourselves.
You're working with him.
I am him.
What?
I'm with a little help from you. no one will ever suspect it.
People died because of me! Innocent people died because of me! I did it!
I understand.
So now there's a lot of information to
10
convey.
years ago in this very barn,
The old story?
a game was played.
10 years old.
Supposedly, John Kramer designed this for a game that took place before all the others.
So there's a fine line between telling everybody too much and not telling them enough. So that shot the Spirigs came up with Ben, was really about like, we're gonna visually show you what we just told you.
10 years ago, I mixed up his X-ray.
But a lot of fans have noticed that the Buckethead here in this scene is wearing a wedding ring, and they've been going crazy about it online, sawfreaks.com and all these different sites.
John decided I shouldn't have to die over an honest mistake.
So, and then obviously as we're running our movie around, like you can go, if we went really fast and we had Charlie's music playing much louder, you wouldn't get the information. So we have to modulate what you hear, what you see, and then hopefully we can still ratchet through to something exciting, even afterwards. But, we have felt the need to go a little bit slower to be able to do this, but we have so many great visuals.
I gave them the same choices that Jigsaw did a decade ago. Jigsaw put 5 people in his game. I put in 3. You and I are the last 2.
So the interesting thing about that fellow we just saw his head is he wasn't the guy we originally had hanging there, but the fellow we originally had got injured, and we had to actually replace and go back and shoot, if you remember, Mark, and that was a thing. We had to find somebody who kind of had the same body type and color, and it was just somebody who was working on the crew that day.
It's amazing. I cast the girls and you cast the guy body types. It's funny how that works.
That's unfair.
Ben! Why was Edgar Munson free?
He was a murderer, but you were protecting him because he was your criminal informant years ago. And you let him walk free.
And the biggest issue for both the Spirigs and the writers were, what was the motivation for Logan to address Halloran this way if he had been doing all these things? And so there is a storyline between Logan's wife and Edgar and Halloran.
Well, Logan thinks his wife would still be alive if Halloran didn't let the killer loose that killed his wife.
And it went through many different machinations, and we just came back with the simplest is the easiest. Edgar, the direct line from Edgar to Halloran to Logan.
Logan, hey, look, I can help you. I can do things for you.
Can you bring my wife back?
Doesn't matter what I say, but
I take credit for one line in the movie, and this is it. When he, after he asked for a choice.
That appeared to be run by Jigsaw.
Hello, Edgar. You're about to play a game. 5 lives are in your hands. Follow my instructions exactly.
Don't be surprised to see Edgar, and maybe what drew him into this, show up in another one. One of our mistakes, Logan shot him high in the chest. We put the bullet low in the abdomen.
Also, I think we see a little bit too much of Logan in that shot. Not like he's really trying to conceal himself as a killer.
The blood under the fingernails of our first victim. It's John Kramer's blood.
And here you see Logan put the blood under the nails.
Some will suspect you. But no one will suspect me.
Okay, we need to bring him in. Now!
Because Eleanor will provide my alibi.
And there were lots of discussions about what should happen when Eleanor got out to the car.
Well, do we see who's in the car? Does she get stopped? Does she get killed? Does she get picked up?
Jigsaw put the pieces of my life back together again. He gave my life purpose.
We can never come from anger or from vengeance. You taught me that.
Ben,
But then there will be no justice. But there will.
And it was fascinating to watch these guys work together on this one little scene we put together literally just to be able to kind of bridge the gap with the bear trap. But these guys know John Kramer and Logan's character is so much better than we ever will. And they talked about it a lot.
Their victims appeared on my table because of you.
No. I can't tell you how many times we shot the end of this movie right here. This was, what was this, like hour 22, hour 23? This was the longest day we've ever worked in a Saw movie.
And I just remember the day that the Spirit Brothers said, pitched us the idea, and they're like, and then it's gonna like peel open like a flower. I thought, what the hell is that gonna look like? Anyway, thanks for sitting with us and listening to the commentary for Jigsaw. Thanks for watching the movie and for watching all the movies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you at the next one. It's Peter Block, Mark Burke, Oren Koulis signing off on behalf of everybody else.
Thank you for watching.